And joining us now, Ontario's Finance Minister Dwight Duncan, the MPP for Windsor-Tecumseh. Welcome back to TVO.
It's always good to be here, Steve.
Yeah, you're our last. We're your last stop of the day.
And this is a tradition for us.
It
Third time now.
I'm glad you've been able to keep it going.
Delighted.
Here's what I want to do tonight. I want to talk about two things.
Okay.
You've got a pretty aggressive tax package out there, both cuts and increases, and then you've got a pretty serious deficit number out there. So that's all we're going to talk about tonight.
Good.
And to that end, let's start with the sales tax harmonization, which was the big piece of the puzzle today. Starting July 1st, 2010, Ontario moves to a single sales tax. No more separate GST and PST. The rate set at 13%. There will be, however, some exemptions. For example, children's clothing and shoes, children's car seats, diapers, books, feminine hygiene products, all exempt. Home buyers will receive sales tax rebates for homes up to $500,000. Families earning less than $160,000 a year will receive 3 checks totaling $1,000 by June 2011 in the transition to this new harmonized tax rate. Singles earning less than $80,000 a year will receive their 3 checks totaling $300. Okay, let's get into this. Why do this?
This is the single most important thing we can do, this package of tax reform, to stimulate job growth in the immediate and longer term. This will make Ontario, it'll make us one of the most competitive jurisdictions for new investment into the future.
Just by harmonizing the tax?
Well, no, it's a tax package, Steve. I mean, there's also $10.6 billion in personal tax cuts, $2.3 billion of which are permanent.
I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. That's the next package.
But this is it. And I mean, most Ontarians, 93% of Ontarians will see a cut in their overall taxes. The other point is the corporate tax side that we're doing. It's an aggressive plan. It's one that we felt at this time was absolutely important in terms of kickstarting both our manufacturing resource sectors and creating that next generation of growth.
I am going to get to all the cuts, but I do want to, I'm very curious about this sales tax harmonization because, as you know, this is something that's been mused about for many, many years, and no one's ever done it because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, it's political suicide, some would argue, so we're going to get to this. Once this is fully phased in, is Ontario out of the sales tax business?
Well, we still get the provincial portion of it, but in fact, yes, you're right. On the sales tax will be collected by the Canada Revenue Agency. They will remit to us on a daily basis, and the cost savings to business on the administration of this, $500 million a year.
How so?
Well, right now we have literally thousands of people involved in the collection. Small businesses, large businesses. If you look at the guidebooks for GST and PST, they're both about this thick. Different things are applied, taxed different ways. It's much more efficient. And the most important thing is, if we were starting all over today with our tax system, the tax system we wouldn't create is the provincial sales tax. There's tax on tax on tax built into that. This gets rid of it, lowers the cost of our exports, and according to the Chamber of Commerce, according to 30 different research
I know,
groups,
all business wants this.
And I think most Ontarians understand the importance of improving the productivity and efficiency of our businesses.
The reason I ask is most politicians don't like to give up power, and you are giving up some power here. I mean, your predecessors, if, for example, they wanted to spur on the sale of appliances, or if they wanted to get houses built, they could offer a retail sales tax holiday on those things and maybe spur on some economic activity. You won't be able to do that anymore, right?
We think it's more important to create a strong and dynamic and growing economy. How much power I have as the Minister of Finance on these things, we still have considerable leverage over a whole range of policy instruments. And we had an arrangement now, an agreement with the federal government that provides us with $4.3 billion in transitional funding and considerable flexibility on the implementation of the tax.
These taxes, I'm told by tax policy people, work best when they're quote-unquote clean. There are a few exemptions to this tax. Why have any exemptions at all?
Because the question is where you cut tax to help consumers with this. And what we chose to do was cut personal income taxes. And that package is quite generous.
We'll now get to that.
I know, but that's you ask the question, so you got to see it in the context of where we were thinking. Every exemption represents foregone revenue to the government. So if I'm forced to choose between giving a broad-based personal tax cut versus an exemption on some item that not everybody uses, I prefer the broad-based tax cut. That improves, again, that gives consumers more money in their pocket.
But you are giving the exemptions as well.
We are. And
why do that?
It's again, it's just a whole variety of reasons that go into it to help people understand the tax, to deal with the reality of the challenge of implementing this tax. But again, this package overall is about overall tax cuts
I understand.
for Ontarians.
I understand. Home oil, home heating oil, is not exempted.
Yeah.
Some of the maritime provinces that brought in the harmonized tax did exempt. How come you have chosen not to exempt that?
Because we chose to cut personal taxes. Again, far smaller percentage of Ontarians use home heating oil than they do in the Maritimes. And so we would rather give a broader tax cut to more people. And by the way, the folks who do use home heating oil will still benefit from that and will likely, in all likelihood, be further ahead.
The new harmonized tax is a larger tax on consumption of some goods that were not taxed in the past. And some people may wonder about the timing of this. Consumers are already skittish. Why would you bring in additional taxation on consumer goods and services when people are already skittish?
Well, first of all, again, you've got to look at the package, and the overall package is a tax cut. When you look at the permanent cut to personal income tax, when you look at the corporate tax, it's actually quite a stimulative tax cut. But we do know, and we agree with those lobbyists, those businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, whole variety, 30 different sectoral organizations that say this is the best thing we can do to help them compete. So in fact, this whole tax package, in my view, will stimulate not only consumption when the tax is implemented in a year, but also it will allow our economy to go to that next generation of growth that we're going to need to but to ensure that we can provide the same quality public health care and public education we do today.
But let me ask you about your approach. Sometimes when governments do very big ticket items, and I think this would, this comes under that category, they appoint a royal commission or a task force to study it, and then they have public hearings, and everybody gets a chance to have their kick at it, and then finally, at the end of the day, something emerges. You guys kind of leaked this 2 days ago or a day ago, and now you've unveiled it as a fait accompli. Is that not a little bit risky in terms of trying to get as broad buy-in from the public as you can?
The world economic crisis compels us to act. This thing has been poked, prodded, studied umpteen times over the years. You know what? We had to take action, and we've taken decisive action to give Ontario hope for a better future. This tax package, Steve, will help our businesses compete, employ more people.
But you need broad public buy-in on this, right?
Yes, you do.
Not just for policy reasons, but politically you need it.
And that's why we put together the package that we did. And if you're not going to do it, you better tell folks what you're going to do to get this economy kick-started again, to get the job creation going again, to help lift Ontario back into the driver's seat.
Okay, here's the other piece of it that we're going to get to now. That was the harmonized sales tax. Here's the corporate tax cuts that you've unveiled. $4.5 billion of tax cuts for business over 3 years. General corporate tax rate cut from 14.3% to 12% and then down to 10% by 2013. The corporate tax rate for small business cut from 5.5% to 4.5%. A 16.7% cut to manufacturing and processing rate. This all effective July 1st. And let's talk as well about the personal income tax cuts. $10.6 billion in tax relief over 3 years. 93% of Ontarians to receive tax cuts. Those in the lowest tax bracket get a rate cut from 6.05% to 5.05%. Average 10% tax cut for those earning less than $80,000 a year. Okay, the other side of the equation. Human nature being what it is, you know where I'm going here. More people may be more ticked off about the 8% additional they're going to have to pay on piano lessons and haircuts and gasoline than they are happy about the tax break that they're going to get for buying a new computer or on a home. So how do you convince what I think it's fair to say is a fairly skeptical public that the tax cuts in this are really worth more than the tax increases?
Well, you just have to present the facts, and you have to put your case, and you have to lead. It's not enough just to, it's not enough anymore just to sit back and debate here or there. We have an opportunity with the agreement we reached with the federal government that allows us to do all of this at the same time, continue to invest in healthcare and education, And it's incumbent on us as a government now to go out and sell this to people and convince them of its merit, both in the short term and the long term. This is the right thing to do. It's about leading Ontario, and it's about getting us back to a solid footing so that we'll have the growth and employment, growth and revenue that allow us to continue to have the best schools and the best healthcare system.
But some people have long memories on this stuff, and they remember almost 20 years ago the debates over the GST, and we were always promised it would be revenue neutral. You're even going beyond that. You're saying this won't just be revenue neutral, it's actually going to leave more money in the pockets of people after it's said and done. Does that strain credulity, though?
Well, I'd invite you to go back and read Mulrooney's autobiography, and which I did. When the Premier first indicated to me that he thought we needed to have another look at this, I went back and looked, and the one thing the Prime Minister Mulroney wrote in his autobiography was that he regretted that they had done some other tax cuts in advance of the '88 election, knowing that they were doing the harmonization, and so he didn't have a complete package. We are in a global crisis that's unprecedented, and I think all of us are willing to put aside our own group's interest, our own union's interests, our own community's interest to say what is right for Ontario, what is right for the people of this province, and indeed for Canada, because you know Canada succeeds when Ontario succeeds. And I think we all know that we have to work together. This package of tax reform will, in fact, keep people whole. We have the most generous, or second most generous now, sales tax credit in the country. We would have been, except Quebec changed theirs in their budget to make it a little bit lower. We now have the lowest first bracket on income in Canada. And by the way, that tax cut works its way through right to the top levels for folks like you and I. Obviously, we don't get as much. We have the one-time transitional money. And I think Ontarians will listen to the Chamber of Commerce. I think they'll listen to the C.D. Howe Institute. I think they will listen to the 30-some sectoral associations that are saying, you know what, this is what we need to get our businesses, to kickstart them, to get things going again. Let's
talk about this $1,000 rebate check that people under a certain income, I think $160,000, will get. 3 separate payments coming out. When the Conservatives governed Ontario, I think you guys, when you were in opposition, you Liberals, were not enamored with the idea of lump sum payments, sales tax rebates going back to people. And now you're implementing them. So what's different now?
This is the best way to get the money to people in a clean way and in a timely fashion.
So Harris was right then?
My recollection is that was done once in a rather quick fashion. This is planned out over a year and a half, almost 2 years in fact. And by the way, the checks are being issued by the Canada Revenue Agency, not by the province of Ontario.
No, you guys are out of that business
and
now.
Exactly. And so the first check will arrive in people's homes just before the tax takes effect. The second one will arrive in advance of the holiday season in 2010, and the third will arrive just before the first anniversary of the implementation of the tax.
Okay, I'm going to say it because you just didn't. The third one arrives 2 months before the next election.
Well, actually, it's about 7 months before the election, and you know, one could argue that it might.
Wait a second. It's
October, and this arrives in June. So June, July, August, September.
4 months, but the campaign starts in August.
And you know, one might argue that this could be a reminder of an unpopular measure if you're right.
You're not sure how it's going to fall. I guess you don't really know,
listen,
do you?
You know what? We know that people are going to want to understand why we're doing this. That's why I'm here tonight. And I appreciate the good work that the news organizations do in informing the debate. And they're also going to want to know what other people say and what they would do.
Let's, I don't want to push this GST comparison too much, but the debate we went through 20 years ago on the GST, I think in hindsight has been seen as good policy, terrible politics. How do you make sure you avoid the fate that Mr. Mulrooney's government suffered because of the GST stuff?
The first step is the package we put together. We have transitional assistance, we have more exemptions, we have very, very substantial cuts in both personal and business taxes. It's the package. I think the state of the economy affords us flexibility too. I mean, you know, who'd have thought 8 months ago that the government of the United States would nationalize banks? Who'd have thought that the banking system in Great Britain would be in tatters? People, I think, understand the enormity of what's before us, and I think all of us, even though we might not like this, that, or the other thing, are prepared to make our own contribution. And in this case, we're getting a tax cut.
Okay, let me do
as
one
we
more.
do the right thing for the economy.
Let me do one more segment with you, and that is on the deficit. Some pretty big numbers here. Michael, let's take a look at this. Total expenditures for the budget released today, 2009-10, $108.9 billion. And that means this province is going into deficit. We just discovered today that for the fiscal year we're coming out of, 08-09, it's $3.9 billion. For 09-10, the next fiscal year, $14.1 billion. For 10-11, $12.2 billion, with a balanced budget forecast by the year 2015-16. Now, Minister, the $14.1 billion deficit for this fiscal year, upcoming, is the biggest number I've ever seen in my life. However, put it into context. As a percentage of the economy, what does that mean?
It's actually smaller than the United States, about the same as Ottawa's, and certainly smaller than Ontario in the 1990s. We don't take this lightly. We are in a global economic meltdown. I mean, and Ontario particularly, we sell to the Americans. Our cars, our products, our exports, by and large, go to the United States. When they're not consuming our products, we see a decline. We have chosen a path, and by the way, not many governments have laid out 5 years in advance. And not many governments have taken the prudence I have in terms of what I would call very modest growth assumptions going forward to say to people, this could come to pass. And so we laid out the beginnings of a plan today to get back to balance. We take it very seriously.
Well, you've got a road there, there's no doubt about it. My question is, though, as Finance Minister, are you alarmed about the fact that it will be another 6 years before you balance the book?
I'm troubled. I wouldn't say alarmed. I mean, when you look at debt to GDP, debt to revenue, when you look at the overall economy, but yeah, deeply, I'd much prefer to be balanced. I'd much prefer, like we've had the last 3 years, to have a surplus. The world's changed. And what we've laid out is the appropriate plan for the coming year. $32.5 billion in infrastructure, $34 billion in total for stimulus.
How concerned should we be, though, that we're on a road of structural deficits that will continue as far as the eye can see?
Well, we've had, as Don Drummond points out, other than the 3 balanced budgets this government brought in, and I think 2 that the Harris-Eves government brought in over the course of 8 years, we've had that for 20 years into the past. But we've laid out a plan. We think it's the right plan. We've taken very great prudence in our assumptions. We will report quarterly. I mean, I remember I was the first finance minister, I think, in Canada to acknowledge we were in a deficit when our numbers first became evident in October. And at that time, we've seen a decline in revenue of almost $2.9 billion just since October. Now, I hope that Governor Carney is right, that we will, the governor of the Bank of Canada, and that we will see a return to very robust growth in very short order. I didn't put that into my budget. I took much more.
Well, hang on. We got these numbers here. Michael, can we bring these up? I'm going to indulge the control room because I want to steal a minute out of our next debate if I can, just to go a little longer. Here's the 08 number. We shrank our economy by 0.4%. Then in 09, shrank by 2.5%. However, for the future, you're anticipating 2.3% growth, and in 11, 3.3%. Which is a pretty bullish number considering where we're sitting today.
Not compared to other analysts. In fact, when you look at those numbers, Governor Carney's projecting 3.8%, although he's modified that again. We are actually below the consensus estimate by our own group of 12 economists. We're not right at the bottom, but we're well below the average. And so we've taken what I would call very prudent assumptions.
Gotcha. Minister, I'd love to talk longer, but I think your people backstage are getting nervous, and I probably should start to do the rest of the program. Thanks so much for coming into TVO tonight.
Thank you, Steve.
We really appreciate
the time.
Okay. Let me also say that for more on today's budget, please visit my blog at tvo.org/theagenda. A couple of programming reminders. Monday, we're going to be in Waterloo for our final Agenda on the Road. We're going to take a closer look at the innovation economy. Then Tuesday, we'll spend the entire hour further examining the Ontario budget and what it may mean for the province in the coming year.